UFOs, what are they? Extraterrestrial intelligence, does it exist? We'll be looking at the resolution of both of these subjects today. I'm an astronomer. I got my bachelor's degree in physics from the University of British Columbia and a master's and PhD in astronomy from the University of Toronto, and served for several years as a research fellow in radio astronomy at the California Institute of Technology. I've also served for several years as a minister in a local church in the Southern California area, and the last several years have been the president and director of research for Reasons to Believe. How I got into this whole subject of UFOs and extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial intelligence, was by becoming an amateur astronomer before pursuing professional astronomy. I got interested in astronomy when I was 7 years of age. I can recall one night when I was walking down the street and I saw the stars and turned to my mother and father and said, "Are the stars hot?" They said, "Yes." And I said, "Why?" They told me to go to the library. And all through my growing up years, I was very interested in astronomy, and I got involved in some research projects on variable stars and also meteors. As a result, I became quite familiar with the skies and the kinds of phenomena that take place in the skies. So when I arrived at the University of British Columbia, I got fingered to handle a lot of the reports that came into the department there concerning unidentified flying objects. And then when I went to the University of Toronto, the same thing happened, and also at the California Institute of Technology. So I've accumulated more than a dozen years of experience in processing reports on unidentified flying objects. Now, what I discovered was that people do not know the sky that well. Rather common natural phenomena gets reported as UFOs. In my experience, almost half of the phone calls and letters that we got purporting UFO encounters, in fact, turned out to be the planet Venus. There's a famous story where a couple of California highway patrolmen were on motorcycles chasing down a UFO. They were going across the Mojave Desert, saw this bright light in the distance, and radioed back to headquarters that they were gaining on this unidentified flying object. It turned out to be the planet Venus. When Venus is a bright morning star, it is so luminous that you can read a newspaper by it. And this only happens about once every 3 years. And it's such a shock when people see that for the first time that they report it typically as an unidentified flying object. Up in Canada, another common misidentification was the star cluster Pleiades. During the northern latitudes, when the Pleiades rise above the horizon, they tend to parallel the horizon. And so we would often get reports of a cluster of spaceships coming in over the horizon. Meteors was another common explanation. Some meteors, when they come close and are large enough, will show up as fireballs, literally a luminous ball of light that exceeds the diameter of the moon. And it's quite a shock when you see that for the first time. But in my observations in amateur astronomy, I would see several of those per year. And so I would simply ask people questions, and sure enough, it was a fireball that they had seen, a meteor coming through the atmosphere. Other natural explanations would be birds with phosphorescent dust on it. Birds typically migrate at night, and if they picked up phosphorescent dust, you'll see this cluster. Inversion layers, they're atmospheric layers that are capable of reflecting light back down to the Earth. I've got a couple of slides here of so-called unidentified flying objects. Took these on one of my vacations, and this first one here shows a very common photograph of a UFO, and you see that cluster of glowing objects over the horizon. And what you need to know to understand the misidentification is that I took that photograph from inside a restaurant, looking through a glass pane. And in behind me, there's a chandelier. And the lights of the chandelier are reflecting off the glass pane into the camera lens. And if I'm not too aware of what's between me and the camera, I will think that these objects are sitting there over the horizon. We get a lot of photographs like that sent in. This next slide here shows what can happen when film is distorted a particular way. This was taken during a heavy mist, and it was the last frame in the roll, and I stretched it a little bit, and you get what you see here as a flying carpet effect. And again, this just shows you what can happen with different instruments. You have to be careful when you're taking photographs or getting radar sightings of UFOs. We need to realize that instruments are capable of generating false images. Then there are the newspaper reports. One thing you have to be aware about with UFOs is that you have to be careful in looking at the newspaper and magazine reports. Why? Because the more sensational stories tend to be reported. The less sensational are underreported. And if something is exposed as a hoax, the disclaimer on that will show up a couple of days later back on page 57 rather than page 1. You really can't get a good statistical feel for UFOs from reading newspapers and magazines. Also, men make mysterious machines. All the governments of the world are involved in developing new kinds of aircraft that are not being generally reported to the public. I can recall back in the 60s jet aircraft that had the capability of hovering. These were being tested at the time, and when they strayed into airspace where the public happened to be there, or maybe research scientists or graduate students, you would get certain kinds of reports. Hoaxes, another whole category. I can recall the University of British Columbia, the Undergraduate Engineering Society, one night released a cluster of hydrogen balloons. And as those balloons rise up into the atmosphere, they eventually pop and they explode. And sure enough, there were dozens of reports of unidentified flying objects the next day on the radio and then in the press. So, and then people will purposely try to trick you. I mean, I've seen many photographs of models of UFOs hung by a nylon thread where it would be very difficult to see a nylon thread. Take the camera to focus a little bit, and you've got a spectacular UFO event. So there are the hoaxes, there are the natural explanations, and it's common for my colleagues in physics and astronomy, based on such natural explanations and hoaxes, to claim that all unidentified flying objects fall into one of those two categories, natural or hoaxes. My own experience is that somewhere between 95 to 99% of all reports of unidentified flying objects that came across my desk would fall into one of those two categories. But I cannot say that that's true of 100% of them. And now we'd like to look at what is the most commonly held explanation for unidentified flying objects.
I believe in them. It's kind of selfish to think that we're the only living creatures or whatever.
I guess I do. I mean, I've never seen one personally, but I mean, there's got to be other life out there besides us.
I really don't. I don't believe in them, really. I don't.
Could be or could not.
I don't believe in UFOs.
The more I read, the more I believe it. I've never seen one. I mean, like I say, seeing is believing. I never saw one. I've read a lot about them. A lot of smart people have said they've seen them. A lot of scientists, and Air Force people and military people, so I guess I have to do that too.
I think it's possible. I mean, if we believe that there are higher forms of life elsewhere, I mean, if you believe in God, it's just something that you cannot preclude. You know? So I do believe that there possibly are UFOs. I mean, they're only unidentified because we don't know what they are.
Definitely. I mean, I got my younger brother, that's one proof of it.
I believe when if I see it, my mind's open to UFOs. I mean, it's a big world out there. I believe that there could be something up there.
I've never seen one, so I personally don't believe in UFOs or extraterrestrials. Although, there could be.
UFOs, I don't think exist. I think it's another thing that man has invented.
I believe they exist. I believe there's a lot out there that we need to discover, and one day we will find life on other planets.
I really don't know. I don't know if there's anything. I've never seen one, so I don't know.
I believe in UFOs. If there is a God, he's on a UFO.
I don't know. It may be. I think I'd have to see one for myself before I could really say I believe in them.
I totally believe in UFOs. I can't conceive a universe without another species, another living force out there.
I can't handle UFOs. No.
There is life on other planets, and if they come here, I'd like to take a ride in one.
It takes a particular kind of planet. A planet's the right kind of galaxy. It must be a spiral galaxy because only in spiral galaxies are planets still being formed. The elliptical galaxies, planets stopped forming a long time ago. So far long ago that at that time there wasn't sufficient heavy elements to make the planets necessary for the support of life. Now I need to point out we're talking about not just life as we know it, but any kind of life. Life requires a certain complexity in the molecules. That complexity demands that these life molecules be built on the carbon atom. Silicon was a candidate, but it is no longer. You can't get enough nucleotides and amino acids in the proteins to give you the complexity necessary for life. Boron's still a possibility, but it's a rare earth. So really the name of the game is carbon. You have to go with carbon if you want astronomers and philosophers. So you need the right kind of galaxy, and the star has to be in the right location in that galaxy. That's one reason why I'm not a Mormon, because the heart of Mormon doctrine is this idea that life arose first in our galaxy on a planet called Kolob in the center of our galaxy. That's about the worst place to try to put life. Radiation is far too intense there to allow for proteins and DNA and RNA to be stable. Moreover, the stars are packed so tightly together that the mutual gravity they would exert in one another would disrupt the planetary orbits. You want to be about 2/3 of the way out from the center of the galaxy. There you're far enough away from the radiation, the stars are far enough apart to make it possible. On the other hand, the stars are not so far apart that there won't be sufficient ashes from dead stars, stars that have extinguished their burning cycle, to make rocky planets in the first place. As you go out into the halo of our galaxy, there just aren't enough heavy elements for the formation of rocky planets. So you have to be about 2/3 away from the center, and that's just where the sun happens to be. So that eliminates about 80% of the stars from contention on that parameter. Only 2/3 of the stars would be in spiral galaxies. Moreover, the star has to be a bachelor star. Now the planet, of course, needs a star. Without a star, there won't be the heat for life. But it can't be more than one star. You throw a second or third or fourth star into the system, those extra stars will disrupt the planetary orbits. Only 40% of the stars in our galaxy are bachelor stars. The star has to be born late, has to form late, because the first two generations of stars do not have sufficient quantities of heavy elements or rocky planets that can support life to exist. And the star has to be middle-aged. In fact, it turns out that everything has to be middle-aged. The universe has to be middle-aged. The galaxy has to be middle-aged. Young stars and old stars are far too unstable in their burning cycle. Only the middle-aged stars burn with a nice steady flame. And the planet has to be middle-aged. In astronomy, only middle-aged systems are stable, and perhaps that's also true of human beings. Now, the star has to be a particular mass, and this is a parameter that Shklovsky and Sagan recognized when they published their book, Intelligent Life in the Universe. Back in 1963, astronomers were aware of only two parameters necessary for the support of life, namely that you have to go with a very special kind of star, a star that's close to the mass of our star, the Sun, and the planet has to be a certain distance from that just right star to keep it at a temperature where life could be supported. Today we're aware of about 40 such parameters, but back when Shklovsky and Sagan wrote their book, there were just those two. And they are significant. If you go with a star bigger than our star, the Sun, it will burn so quickly and erratically it'd be impossible for life to be supported on a planet going about such a star. Now if you go with a star that's smaller than our star, the Sun, it'll be nice and stable. However, it'll be necessary to bring the life support planet closer to that smaller star to keep it at the temperature where life chemistry can proceed. Now the problem with that is that the tidal interaction between a planet and its star goes up with the inverse fourth power of the distance. What that means in layman's language is you only have to bring that planet ever so slightly closer to the star before the tidal interaction becomes so strong between the planet and the star that the rotation rate of that star gets heavily braked. And it would be impossible in such a star planet system, for the planet to have a rotation period as rapid as 24 hours. You'd be looking at rotation periods on the order of months. And that's what we see in Venus and Mercury. They're close enough to the Sun that they have suffered this tidal braking, and they have these very long rotation periods. And what that does for you is it makes it very hot in the daytime and cold when you're on the other side. Or hot all the time, as in Venus, where you got that massive atmosphere. So that's not going to work. You have to go with a star that's about the mass of our star, the Sun. Not smaller, not bigger. And as Shklovsky and Sagan recognize, it eliminates about 2 stars out of 10,000 in our galaxy or universe from contention. And you have to have the planet just the right distance from that just right star. If you go a little bit closer, you get a runaway greenhouse effect where it becomes too hot for life to exist. But if you're a little bit farther away, you get a runaway freeze-up, and it becomes too cold for life to exist. Now, the sensitivity on that particular parameter is a little less than 1 million miles. Our planet Earth is 93 million miles from the Sun, but if you bring it 1 million miles closer or 1 million miles farther away, you're going to suffer one of these two runaways. So that's a sensitive parameter. And Shklovsky and Sagan recognize that only about 4 planets out of 10,000 will be that necessary just right distance from its star. And that's where they came up with the conclusion that there might be 10,000 life support planets in our galaxy. You take 2 out of 10,000 times 4 out of 10,000, that's 1 chance in 10 million. There's 100 billion stars in our universe. And if you give the optimistic estimate that there's as many planets as there are stars, that gives you your 10,000 life support sites in our galaxy. But as you can see from these 2 charts I have here, that there are many more than just these 2 parameters. We've already looked at over half a dozen. The star has to be the right color for efficient photosynthesis. You don't want the star too far away or too close to past supernova phenomena. If you got nearby supernova, very nearby, it's going to exterminate life. But if you don't have them, you're not going to have the heavy elements necessary for life chemistry to take place. Now, we're not going to go over all these planetary parameters. You can see them there in the chart. The tilt of the axis has to be just right to get the appropriate seasons so they're not too extreme. You want a rotation period that's close to 24 hours. If it's much more rapid than that, you're going to get windstorms that will make it unacceptable for life, at least advanced life, to exist on our planet. Jupiter, for example, rotates once every 10 hours, and as a result has windstorms in a quiet day as 1,000 miles per hour. On the other hand, you don't want it rotating too slowly, because then it gets to be too hot in the daytime and too cold at night. The escape velocity has to be just right. That's why you don't want to go too large or dense of a planet. You want an escape velocity such that the gases that are inappropriate for advanced life, like ammonia and methane, will dissipate to outer space, where the gravity won't be strong enough to retain those gases. However, you want the planet to have a strong enough gravity that it's going to retain water vapor, because water is essential for life. If you remember your high school chemistry, water is a molecular weight of 18, ammonia 17, methane 16. What we see with planet Earth is it has just the right gravity and the temperature to generate an escape velocity that guarantees that the 18 stays, but the 17 to 16 dissipate to outer space. Most planets aren't going to have that just right set of parameters to keep the water and not retain large quantities of ammonia and methane, about 1 in 1,000. The magnetic field has to be just right. You need a magnetic field so that you're going to have some kind of Van Allen belts being produced that will protect you from soft cosmic rays. But you don't want such strong magnetic fields in the Earth that you get magnetic storms that will be disruptive for life. The planet has to have the right reflectivity to avoid a runaway greenhouse or a runaway freeze-up. The crust has to be the right thickness. If the crust of the planet is too thick, too much of the oxygen will be consumed in that crust. On the other hand, if it's too thin, volcanic eruptions would make it difficult for life to exist. The oceans and the continents have to be just the right ratio. As you can see by the second chart here, the soil has to have just the right mineralization. The atmosphere, several parameters, the pressure, the transparency, the electric discharge rate, the temperature gradient, all of these things have to be just right for life to exist on our planet, particularly the advanced life. Now, I'm going to skip the others, but one that I'd like to focus on is seismic activity. You need earthquakes. Without earthquakes, nutrients on the continents would erode through wind and water into the oceans. And eventually the oceans would have all the nutrients essential for life, and the continents would be denuded of such resources. But thanks to earthquakes, tectonic plate movements, that material gets recycled back to the continents. And life is possible on the continents over long periods of time. On the other hand, the recycling is just enough to keep those nutrients going back into the continents, but it's not so great that it's impossible for us to live in cities today. So the next time you feel an earthquake, you might want to thank God for His perfect providence, giving us just those right conditions. Now, some of these parameters that you see here on this list is 30 such parameters. There are 40 that are described in the literature. If you're interested in going over these in detail, I have described them in some detail in my book, The Fingerprint of God. Other authors, Christian and non-Christian, have discussed these parameters, all leading to the conclusion that what we see in the sun and the earth is design. That there's been design in the system to make it possible for life to be supported here on planet Earth. The reason we make that statement is because as you multiply all these parameters together, most of them are independent. So if you got 1 chance in 10 for one parameter and 1 chance in 100 for the other, the chances of both of them being in that necessary narrow range would be 1 chance in 1,000. And if you get a third one, it's 1 chance in 1,000. That makes it 1 in 1,000 times 1 in 100 times 1 in 10, or 1 in a million. Now, not all of these parameters you see listed here are independent of one another. There are some dependencies going on. And I've tried to be very generous in estimating what these dependency factors are. I'm saying at most they might add up to about a factor of 1 billion. But counterbalancing that is a need to keep all these parameters within those narrow ranges over a sufficient period of time. There needs to be some longevity to these parameters. And it's going to reduce the probability a little bit. And again, I'm trying to be conservative and say it's only 1/10,000th. But as you multiply all this out, you come up with a conservative estimate, very conservative in my opinion, that there's less than 1 chance in 100 billion trillion of finding a planet with all these parameters set so life would be possible on that particular planet. Now you compare that with the known number of stars in our galaxy. And we've been able to measure out to the limits of the universe, and we can count up about 100 billion trillion stars exists in our universe. Now you take that number, 100 billion trillion, and divide by 100 billion trillion trillion. And this is on the optimistic assumption that there is as many planets as there are stars. Personally, I think there are far fewer. But if you take that optimistic estimate, divide those two numbers out, you come up with a conclusion that there's less than 1 chance in 1 trillion of finding even one planet in the entire universe where you have the conditions such that life would be possible on that planet. Now, we're not even talking about the much more difficult problem of life arising on that planet. Just looking at what you need for that life to be supported. And it's such that you'd have to conclude that it's a miracle that Earth has the conditions necessary for life. Earth itself must be designed. By natural processes, there isn't the remotest chance of finding another planet with the conditions necessary for the support of life, which means it's a waste of time to look for extraterrestrial intelligence. We'd be far better off, as Senator Proxmire said, to look for intelligent life in Washington than look for it elsewhere in outer space. And he was only exposed to a few of these parameters. As we do more and more research, we see the odds are becoming more and more remote. But it also eliminates extraterrestrial intelligence as an explanation, as a possible explanation for unidentified flying objects. One thing we do know, we're not being visited by craft from outer space. Now you might say, well, couldn't God have done the miracle on planet Earth and somewhere else? Well, what we see in the Bible is a record that has been confirmed by the latest science and by history that the Bible is an accurate record of what God intended for man. And going through that evidence and coming to that conclusion, I can tell you that the tenor of the Bible is that God performed the miracles on this one planet alone. There's no explicit statement in the Bible, but it does say that Jesus Christ died once for all, one time, on planet Earth. That's in the book of Hebrews. And in 1 Corinthians, we are told that all the angels in heaven are watching planet Earth to learn about the grace of God. So evidently this is center stage. By natural processes, not the remotest chance, and we see in the pages of the Bible, is a strong implication that God did it just once. All the more reason to take good care of planet Earth as he commanded in Genesis 1:28, because this is the one place that he has designed life to exist. Now, we can make an even stronger statement that unidentified flying objects are not physical at all. We can show that it's not physical extraterrestrial intelligence. We can go one step further and say it's not physical at all. The reasons for its non-physicality is that at the same sightings you can see in the next chart, UFOs sometimes can be photographed but not seen, or seen but not photographed. Or they can be seen and there's no radar signal, or you get a radar signal and they can't be seen. Physical objects don't behave that way. If you can see them, you can photograph them. If you can photograph them, you can see them. There has never been a sonic boom from a UFO. Physics tells us that any object moving at velocities exceeding 700 miles per hour must generate a sonic boom. And yet UFOs typically are recorded at moving at velocities moving in excess of 5,000 miles per hour, typically between 5 and 18,000 miles per hour. Not a single sonic boom. No sonic booms. UFOs sometimes project light of finite length. And what I mean by that is a bright, sharp, narrow beam of light that suddenly ends. When I shine a flashlight, it dissipates. That doesn't happen in some of these UFO phenomena. UFOs violate the laws of physics, and they will go from 5 to 18,000 miles an hour down to a sudden stop in like 1 second. No physical object can withstand such a deceleration. Or they'll go from 5 to 15,000 miles an hour and make a sharp right angle turn. Again, something that's impossible for a physical object to survive. You can take a solid ball of steel and take it through such a sharp right angle turn or such a sharp stop, and you'll find that the forces will be so strong that those atoms of iron will be blasted apart from one another. And UFOs are able to violate those basic laws of physics. In the next chart you can see that at the same sighting a UFO can appear or disappear, disintegrate and come back together again. There's no physical uniformity to these UFOs. And electromagnetic communication is out of all proportion. There's no electromagnetic communication going on. Here you have dozens of these UFO coming in formation, yet they're not talking to one another. Nobody's ever intercepted any communication going on. Of all the photographs we have, no high resolution. They're always slightly out of focus. And one unusual thing about UFOs is they blur and refocus. Physical objects don't behave that way. And lastly, the electromagnetic phenomenon is out of all proportion to what you can measure. Sometimes there's been measuring devices around, and they measure something on the order of the Earth's magnetic field, 1 Gauss or less. And yet they can see the effects of magnetic distortion that exceeds tens of thousands of Gauss. Now this is an abbreviated list. I have material here on UFOs giving 42 separate reasons why this UFO phenomena cannot be physical, consistently violating the laws of physics. But it is such that of all the physicists who've been doing research in this field, and I can name some physicists, Alan Hynek, James McCampbell, Jacques Vallée, Jacques Lemaitre, Kurt Wagner, these individuals have all drawn the same conclusion after many years, in some cases decades of UFO research, that whatever the UFO phenomena is, it's not physical. However, we're forced to draw the conclusion that it's real. Real, but not physical. Why do I say real? Because of the close encounters of the second kind. I'm speaking basically about the crash sites, where you can see the ground has been depressed by 2, 3, 4 feet. Something obviously depressed that ground. The grass is burnt, the trees are knocked down. There are magnetic effects. So clearly, some kind of energy is being released. Something is going on. There's some reality there, but it's not physical reality. Now, a common presupposition in science is that the only thing that exists is non-physical reality. However, that conclusion has been disturbed by some of the research going on in the origin of the universe. I have a research paper here published by Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose, documenting their discovery of the space-time theorems of general relativity. And in this research paper, they point out that if the equations of general relativity govern the universe, then we recognize that not only do we have a creation event for all the matter and energy in the universe, something that Albert Einstein was able to derive, but we even have a moment of creation for the space-time dimensions of the universe. Length, width, height, time, matter, and energy can all be traced back to a moment of creation, a moment when they did not exist. Now that means that the cause for the universe must lie outside, independent of matter, energy, length, width, height, and time. Which means the Creator moves and operates in non-physical reality. Now this is something I've written extensively about in my book, The Fingerprint of God. The evidence that we've been able to derive that general relativity is a correct description of the universe, and therefore these theorems apply. And I am a Christian, so you might expect that I would be wanting to draw those conclusions, but it's a conclusion that every researcher who's written books on this subject of the anthropic principle or the moment of creation agree. All of us writing in this field, and there's almost a dozen of us now, and I think I'm the only Christian in the whole bunch, acknowledge that there must be this entity outside of matter, energy, space, and time that brought the universe into existence, which means he's a transcendent being, and he must be a personal being in the way he exquisitely shaped and crafted the universe, the sun, and the earth so that we could live here today. He's personal and transcendent. Now, as you stack up the holy books of the religions of the world, what we're seeing with respect to this new physics is that the Bibles statements about God, the universe, and non-physical reality match this evidence, these proofs that are coming out of the new scientific discoveries, but they contradict the message of the other holy books. In other words, what we're seeing from the latest science is that we can trust what the Bible has to say about non-physical reality. And what it tells us is that God is not alone in non-physical reality. He has created beings to exist with him there in non-physical reality. He has created angels. 2/3 of the angels are submitted to him. 1/3 are in rebellion, often referred to in the Bible as demons. So when it comes to a phenomena that we are forced to conclude is non-physical but real, the UFO phenomena, and here I'm referring to the 1 to 2% that do not have a natural explanation, that residual. It can be from God, it could be from the angels, or it could be from the demons. Now what I'd like to do right now is to quote to you from several UFO researchers as to what they believe is the conclusion. Now we have Lynn Cateau. She's a bibliographer for the Library of Congress. And several years ago, she researched 1,600 books and articles on unidentified flying objects. And she's not a Christian. She's a secular researcher paid by the government. And this is what she said in her report. Quote, "Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomena which have long been known to theologians and parapsychologists." Or from the Flying Saucer Review, a quote here, "Without citing scores of cases here, it is possible to realize that the features listed above as pertaining to demons crop up again and again in UFO reports," end quote. Or from John Keel, a reliable UFO investigator for actually a couple of decades, he describes himself as an agnostic. And this is what he says, quote, "Demonology is not just another crackpotology. It is the ancient and scholarly study of monsters and demons who have seemingly coexisted with man throughout history. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists, and scholars, and uncounted numbers of well-documented demonic events are readily available to every researcher. The manifestation occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomena itself." In other words, it's not God, it's not the angels, it's the demons. And we'd like to cut away to an interview of an individual who's pastoring a UFO church. The UFO phenomenon is religious. There are 4 religions in the United States today, many more than 4 actually, but these are the 4 most significant: the Orontia Group, Solar Cross Foundation, Aetherius Society, and School of Thought, all founded on the belief that through UFOs we can find the answers to life.
People often say, when are UFOs or flying saucers or space intelligences going to land openly amongst us? We know they're real. The evidence for their existence is totally overwhelming. I mean, these are intelligences who can travel beyond the speed of light. Intelligences who can use their own physical structures, break them down, build them up by thought, so that they do not have to pass away into a state of unconsciousness through death as we have on this earth, but in other words, they can live an awfully long time and do. Because of various movies and films, alien intelligence is generally projected in forms which are monstrous or horrific or frightening. This, I think, hasn't done the subject any good. But basically, these intelligences are far, far kinder than we are and far, far more advanced. When we are ready, and I think we'll prove it by how we think and how we act, they will come amongst us and guide us into a greater future.
Let's look at the evidence why all these researchers concluded that the UFO phenomena falls in the category of demonic phenomena. This chart here demonstrates that messages come through UFOs. We're talking about close encounters of the third kind, where people believe they've actually had contact with UFOs. And the content of these messages is identical to what you see being received through demonic encounters, through mediums and mystics and seances. Specifically, what you find is that they promote racism, illicit sex, astrology, drug abuse, the occult. They deny the deity of Jesus Christ. There's a 2,000-page book that was communicated, so-called communicated through UFO beings. 1/3 of the content of that Urantia book is a denial of the deity of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ was God. And you see that in demonic phenomena and occult phenomena as well. A focus, a singular focus on trying to deny that Jesus Christ is the source of truth, life, and love for mankind. People who have had contact with UFOs suffer the same physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual symptoms as victims of demonia. They report voices in the mind, for example. The incidence of crimes like kidnapping, rape, murder, assault, and property damage is far higher among these so-called UFO-nauts than the population at large, at least 100 times higher. Cars reported to have been driven by these UFO-nauts are found to have unregistered license plates. You look up the license plate, no such license plate exists. UFO phenomena, just like demonic phenomena, take place far more frequently at night or in low light than they do in broad daylight. Next chart gives several other examples. These UFO beings preach what's called the New Age, actually the old occult message. Over and over again you see this repetition that we have within ourselves the power to achieve perfection outside of Jesus Christ. Both UFOs and demons dazzle men with displays of miraculous power. When you see miracles in the Bible, what you see, though, is that God and his angels will perform miracles to bring men to repentance, not to dazzle them. Occult phenomena, it's quite the opposite. Noxious odors often accompany close UFO encounters, bad smells. You also see that in the occult and in seances. An abnormally high death, suicide, and insanity rate is experienced by those who've had these close encounters with UFOs, and even amongst UFO researchers, people who have spent many years researching UFOs, particularly these encounters of the second and third kind. UFO beings are typically featureless. Can't see their face in sharp focus. It's always a blur. And then something that I discovered years ago when I was at the Algonquin Radio Observatory. There were 3 of us who were logging hundreds, even thousands of hours of observing time in the telescope. We never had encounters with UFOs, never saw anything. But there were other astronomers who, even though they only had a few hours a year, consistently reported encounters with UFOs. And I said, how come them and not us? But what I realized is that us, a small group of graduate students there, we didn't have past experiences in occult activity, whereas these astronomers are having consistent encounters with UFOs, they did. So from that time onward, whenever I processed a UFO report that turned out not to have a natural explanation, I would quiz the individual about their past experiences in the occult. And every single time since that time, which is about 20 years ago, the last 20 years, I've yet to see an exception to that rule of thumb. I'm not saying this is a law, but at least it's something I've observed to be completely consistent. The UFO either turns out to have a natural explanation, or the individual experiencing this UFO has had some past experiences in the occult that they have not repented of. Now, I've made this comment many times on national radio. I always get people calling in. I say, well, I've seen UFOs and I don't have any occult activities in my background. Well, almost always it turns out to be a fireball or some kind of inversion layer or Venus or whatever. But in those cases where it doesn't, as you probe, you discover that there is past occult experiences in that individual's background. Moreover, the greater the degree of occult activity in that person's background, the more experiences they have with UFOs. So I think that's a telling piece of evidence. Another telling piece of evidence, and this is in the literature, this is not unique to me, is something called Guerin's Law. Guerin's Law says that in UFOlogy, any law is immediately violated by subsequent sightings. The one exception to that law is the explanation that UFOs are a demonic phenomena. Demons perfectly match everything that we see being experienced amongst these UFOs that don't have natural explanations. Now, I must say one word about a particular famous incident in New Mexico back in the 40s. The story is that there's this craft that crashed into the New Mexico desert, and our military recovered the craft, bits and pieces of it at least, including several bodies of UFO beings. And they've kept this in a hangar in New Mexico, and have kept it a secret from the American public all those years. And that's often given as proof that they are physical beings, come to us from some other planet. I'm extremely skeptical, because I don't believe our government has the capacity to keep something like that secret for 40 plus years. And there's not been one piece of tangible evidence. A few fuzzy photographs, but nothing you can put in a museum. Not a single artifact of this UFO or any other UFO crash for that matter has ever appeared in a museum. And I would just give the story of President Nixon. Here he was with this tape, 20-minute blank in the tape. He tried to keep it a secret from the American public, and he had all the resources of the presidency behind him. How long did he keep it a secret? 11 days. So we're to believe a story that our military can keep something as vast as this a secret for 40 plus years? I say, no way. We're dealing with a demonic phenomena. Now, when I was in the Soviet Union, speaking to research scientists about God and the scientific evidence, my most frequently requested message was, please speak on UFOs, because the UFO phenomenon is far more pervasive in the Soviet Union than it is here. And I think that's because the Soviet government has publicly and financially sponsored research into the occult. So of course it's much more pervasive there. But as I would speak to these auditoria filled with Soviet scientists, and I would get to this point in my message, several of them would stand up and say, what can we do to be delivered? We've done these things. We have had these experiences in the occult. What can we do? And I would answer back to them, do you want permanent deliverance? And they'd say, yes, that's what we want, permanent deliverance. And I says, here's how you get it. You need to repent of your past occult activities. Agree with God that what you have done in the past displeases Him. Tell Him so in prayer. And make a commitment not to return to those practices. And then you need to give control of your life to Jesus Christ. To receive His gift of eternal life. To receive His gift of pardon from all the offenses you've committed against God and man, past, present, and future. You need to receive those gifts from God. And then commit yourself to follow the commands that God has given to you in the pages of the Bible. Give Him control of your life. Take direction from Him. And then you'll have permanent deliverance. Well, of course, many of them would ask, how do I know if I had these past occult activities? And we get that response here in the United States as well as Canada and everywhere else we travel with reasons to believe. And so one of the things we've prepared is a little checklist. A checklist that we call dealing with demons. And we make some basic definitions here of what demons are, about demon oppression and demon possession, and how can you tell whether or not you're being oppressed by demons, whether you've been doing things in the occult. We give you about 40 things to check here as to things that would qualify as being involved in the occult. And then after taking you through this checklist where you can tick off, yes, I've done this, I've done that, I've had experiences like this, then we give you the steps on how to be delivered, how to confess this to God, how to get rid of the articles from your life. If you've got certain occult tools in your home, You need to destroy them. Take care of it. Confess to God in prayer that this was something that displeases him, and then bring your life under the control of Jesus Christ. That way you'll get deliverance. So if any of you would like this, we can make this available to you through our organization. What I want to close with is something that I noticed back in the late 60s. This has since been reported in many pieces of literature on UFOs. Namely that in the middle to late 1960s, particularly 1966, 67, and 68, there was a vast increase in UFO sightings all over the world. Nations all over the world saw increases as much as a factor of 10 and 20 times in the UFO sightings. Now that has since leveled off, but the level of UFO sightings today compared to 40 years ago is far greater. Maybe you consider there's more public interest, but I think there's more to that. It seems that there's a heightened degree of this kind of demonic phenomena going on worldwide. And I'd like to quote to you from two of the most respected UFO investigators. These would be the physicists Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée. And here's what they say in their writings after decades of research on UFOs. Quote, "The bizarre aspects of UFOs may be part of the whole plan. Perhaps there is a UFO fifth column to purposely mislead us, to purposely mislead mankind. The Bible speaks of this. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. It tells us that the coming of the lawless one, this is Satan coming back embodying the person of an individual who will be dictator over the whole world sometime in the future. This is what the Bible predicts. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness." Satan is setting up mankind for a deception. He's also setting up mankind to come up with an explanation from his perspective for what the Bible predicts as the great snatch-up of all the believers from planet Earth. A day will come when Jesus Christ will rescue bodily, physically, taking up hundreds of millions of believers from the planet. And Satan and his dictator must come up with an explanation. Extraterrestrial physical beings have come to planet Earth and have taken hostages, or they've taken people to train for a new world order. That's the great lie that I believe 2 Thessalonians 2 is talking about. I encourage you to be forewarned, and I encourage you to take the biblical steps to be rescued from your past occult activities, and to encourage others that you see falling into this trap, to give them the steps, to give them the evidence that they too can be rescued.
There's got to be other life out there besides us.
I really don't. I don't believe in them, really. I don't.
Could be or could not.
I don't believe in UFOs.
The more I read, the more I believe it. I've never seen one. I mean, like I say, seeing is believing. I never saw one. I've read a lot about them. A lot of smart people have said they've seen them. A lot of scientists and Air Force people and military people. So I guess I have to believe that too.
I think it's possible. I mean, if we believe that there are higher forms of life elsewhere, I mean, if you believe in God, it's just something that you cannot preclude, you know. So I do believe that there possibly are UFOs. I mean, they're only unidentified because we don't know what they are.
Definitely. I mean, I got my younger brother, you know, that's one proof of it.
I believe when if I see it, my mind's open to UFOs. I mean, it's a big world out there, and I believe that there could be something up there.
I've never seen one, so I personally don't believe in UFOs or extraterrestrials, although, you know, there could be.
UFOs I don't think exist. I think it's another thing that
man has invented.
I believe they exist. I believe there's a lot out there that we need to discover, and one day we will find life on other planets.
I really don't know. I don't know if there's anything. I've never seen one, so I don't know.
I believe in UFOs. If there is a God, he's on a UFO.
I don't know. It may be. I think I'd have to see one for myself before I can really say I believe in them.
I totally believe in UFOs. I can't conceive a universe without another species, another living force out there.
I can't handle UFOs. No. I don't know. Space is so vast and huge that we don't even have the technology to get way out there. So, who's to say there's not?
Against all of my husband's advice, I guess I do. I sort of do.
I read some of that stuff. I get caught up in it, but I don't. I haven't really seen or experienced anything myself to lead me to believe.
Well, there may be outer space life, but I don't believe in UFOs. Because if they came down here, can you imagine a group that far advanced that could make interplanetary flight and wouldn't be curious enough to land and find out what was going on here? It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
I think since God created Earth, I realize he created other planets also, but I think he put life, man as we know it, on Earth and Earth only.
Well, UFOs, it's hard to say. I don't think the Bible really touches on that. It's very possible, but I don't think, if Christ is going to die for the sins of the world, then he, I don't think there's another world that's set aside that guys died for also.
There is life on other planets. And if they come here, I'd like to take a ride in one.
This program was sponsored by TBN and was made possible by your love gifts and telephone pledges. It can remain on the air only with your continued support. So write to TBN, P.O. Box A, Santana, California, 92711.
Recent discoveries at the frontiers of science powerfully affirm not only the existence of a creator, but also the complete reliability of the Bible as his word. To learn more about faith, science, and the Bible, contact Reasons to Believe. P.O. Box 5978, Pasadena, California, 91117.